What happens when a father who lost his son in Afghanistan comes to collect his boy's medical records, only to be made to wait 6 hours in a hospital waiting room? And why would a doctor refuse to see him? The ending of this story will shock everyone. It was 8:15 a.m. on a cold Tuesday morning when General Marcus Williams pulled into the parking lot of Memorial Veterans Hospital in Richmond, Virginia. The autumn wind carried the scent of fallen leaves, but Marcus barely noticed. His mind was focused on one thing: getting the final medical reports about his son, Staff Sergeant Michael Williams, who had been killed in action 3 weeks ago in Kandahar province. Marcus had served 32 years in the United States Army. He'd seen combat in Iraq, led troops through the most dangerous missions imaginable, and earned respect from every soldier who served under him. But today, he wasn't General Williams. Today, he was just a father trying to understand the final moments of his son's life. The hospital lobby buzzed with the usual morning activity. Patients checked in, visitors hurried toward elevators, and medical staff moved with purpose through the corridors. Marcus approached the information desk, where a young receptionist with tired eyes looked up from her computer screen. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the grief that had been his constant companion for weeks. "I'm General Marcus Williams. I have an appointment at 8:30 with Dr. Harrison about my son's medical records." The receptionist's fingers moved across her keyboard, her expression neutral. "Let me check that for you, sir." She paused, scrolling through what appeared to be a lengthy schedule. "I see your name here, but Dr. Harrison is currently in surgery. He should be available shortly. If you could just take a seat in the waiting area, someone will call you when he's ready." Marcus nodded, though something felt off about her tone. It was too rehearsed, too careful. But he'd learned patience in the military. Good things came to those who waited with discipline. He found a seat near the window, watching as morning turned slowly toward noon. The waiting room filled and emptied several times. Patients came and went. Appointments were called, but Marcus remained seated. Each time he approached the desk to inquire about the delay, he received the same response: "Dr. Harrison is still tied up. Just a little longer, sir." By 11 a.m., Marcus's patience was wearing thin. He'd noticed something troubling. Other families were being seen. People who had arrived after him were being called back for their appointments. When a young woman who had checked in at 10:30 was escorted to the elevator, Marcus stood up and walked back to the reception desk. "Excuse me," he said, his military bearing evident in his posture. "I've been waiting for nearly 3 hours. Is there a problem with my appointment?" The receptionist avoided his eyes. "I'm sorry for the delay, General Williams. Dr. Harrison is dealing with an emergency situation. I'll check again." She picked up the phone, had a brief, whispered conversation, then hung up. "He should be with you very soon." Marcus returned to his seat, but now he was paying closer attention to everything around him. He watched as staff members passed by, noting how some glanced in his direction before quickly looking away. He observed the way conversations seemed to quiet when he approached the desk. 32 years of military service had taught him to read situations, and every instinct was telling him that something was wrong. The clock on the wall ticked past noon. Marcus had now been waiting for over 3.5 hours. His son's records, the final pieces of information about Michael's care after he was wounded, the details about his last hours, were somewhere in this building, and no one seemed willing to help him access them. A young nurse walked past, and Marcus noticed her glance at him with what looked like sympathy. She approached the reception desk, whispered something to the clerk, and then walked away. The receptionist immediately picked up the phone again. Marcus decided to try a different approach. He walked to the elevator bank and pressed the button for the 3rd floor, where he knew the medical records department was located. If Dr. Harrison wasn't available, perhaps someone else could help him. But as the elevator doors opened and he stepped inside, a security guard appeared. "Excuse me, sir, but you'll need to return to the waiting area. Dr. Harrison will see you shortly." "How shortly?" Marcus asked, his patience finally beginning to crack. "I don't have that information, sir, but you'll need to wait downstairs." Marcus studied the guard's face. The man was young, probably former military himself based on his bearing. "Son, I'm not looking for trouble. I just want to see my boy's medical records. Can you tell me why that's taking 6 hours?" The guard's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir, but I have my orders." "Orders? That word hit Marcus like a physical blow. Someone had given orders about him. This wasn't about Dr. Harrison being busy or tied up in surgery. Someone had deliberately decided to keep him waiting, to deny him access to information about his own son. As Marcus returned to the waiting room, his mind began working through the possibilities. Why would a hospital delay a father's access to his deceased son's medical records? What could possibly be so sensitive that they would make a grieving parent wait for hours without explanation? The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the windows when Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his cell phone and made a call that would set in motion a chain of events no one at Memorial Veterans Hospital was prepared for. But first, he needed to understand exactly what they were trying to hide. The person Marcus called was Colonel Patricia Hayes, his former aide-de-camp and now a military liaison specializing in veterans affairs. Patricia had always been thorough, relentless when it came to protecting service members and their families. If anyone could help him navigate this bureaucratic nightmare, it was her. "Patricia, it's Marcus Williams," he said quietly into his phone, stepping toward a corner of the waiting room for privacy. "General Williams. Sir, I've been thinking about you. How are you holding up?" Her voice carried genuine concern. "I'm at Memorial Veterans Hospital, trying to get Michael's final medical records. I've been here since 8:30 this morning, and they keep telling me the doctor is unavailable. Something's not right here." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sir, that doesn't sound like standard procedure. Medical records for deceased service members should be readily available to immediate family. What reason are they giving for the delay?" "That's just it. They're not giving a real reason. Just vague excuses about the doctor being busy. But I've watched other families come and go. I'm being specifically delayed. General, with your permission, I'd like to make some calls. Something about this feels wrong to me too." "Do it," Marcus said firmly. "I want to know what's going on." After ending the call, Marcus returned to his seat, but now he was watching everything with a different perspective. He began timing the interactions at the reception desk, noting how long other appointments took, observing the body language of the staff. What he saw confirmed his suspicions. There was a deliberate effort to keep him away from his son's records. At 2:30 p.m., a woman in a business suit approached him. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with graying hair and an authoritative demeanor. "General Williams? I'm Linda Crawford, hospital administrator. I understand you've been waiting to see Dr. Harrison." "For over 6 hours," Marcus replied, standing to face her. "I sincerely apologize for the delay. Dr. Harrison had to respond to multiple emergencies today. However, I'd like to discuss your son's case with you, if that would be acceptable." Marcus studied her face. "I don't want to discuss anything. I want to see the medical records. That's all." Crawford's expression tightened slightly. "General, there are some complications with your son's file that we need to address before we can release the complete records." "What kind of complications?" "Perhaps we could speak privately in my office." Every instinct Marcus had developed over 3 decades of military service was now screaming at him. "Ms. Crawford, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd appreciate a direct answer. Is there something in my son's medical file that you don't want me to see?" Crawford hesitated, and that hesitation told Marcus everything he needed to know. "General Williams, I think it would be best if we, yes or no, Ms. Crawford. Is there something you're hiding?" Before she could answer, Marcus's phone rang. It was Patricia. "General, you need to hear this. I called my contact at the Veterans Administration, and then I called the Department of Defense Medical Review Board. Your son's case has been flagged for internal review." "What does that mean?" "Sir, it means there's something in his medical treatment that's being investigated. And General, I think you need to know that there have been other cases similar to this one. Service members who died under questionable medical circumstances, and their families being denied access to complete records." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Are you telling me my son didn't die from his combat wounds?" "Sir, I can't say that definitively. But I can tell you that the Medical Review Board has been investigating several cases of substandard care at forward operating base medical facilities. Cases where service members died not from their injuries, but from medical errors or negligence." The phone slipped from Marcus's hand for just a moment before he caught it. Michael hadn't just died serving his country. He might have died because someone failed to provide adequate medical care. Patricia, I need you to get me someone who can force this hospital to release those records. Today. Already working on it, sir. I've contacted a friend at the Inspector General's office. And General, I think you should know that Memorial Veterans Hospital has been treating several wounded service members from your son's unit. The same unit that was involved in the incident that wounded Michael. Marcus looked around the waiting room with new eyes. Were there other families who had been kept waiting? Other parents who had been denied access to their children's medical records? How many others? He asked. At least 6 families that I can confirm. All of them reported similar delays and stonewalling when trying to access complete medical records. Marcus ended the call and turned back to Linda Crawford, who had been standing nearby, clearly trying to overhear his conversation. Ms. Crawford, I'm going to give you one opportunity to do the right thing. I want every page of my son's medical file, and I want it now. Not a summary, not a redacted version, everything. Crawford's composure finally cracked. General Williams, I understand your frustration, but there are legal protocols we must follow when there's an ongoing investigation. Investigation. Marcus's voice cut through the ambient noise of the waiting room like a blade. What investigation? The administrator realized she had said too much. Her face went pale as she struggled to backtrack. What I meant was... But Marcus was no longer listening to her stumbling explanations. He was looking past her, toward the elevator bank, where 2 men in dark suits were stepping out. They weren't hospital staff. Their bearing, their purposeful movement, everything about them screamed federal agents. The truth was about to come out, whether the hospital wanted it to or not. The 2 men in dark suits approached with the measured gait of people accustomed to delivering difficult news. The taller of the 2, a man in his 40s with prematurely grey hair, extended his hand to Marcus. General Williams? I'm Special Agent David Foster, Office of Inspector General. This is Agent Sarah Chen. We need to speak with you about your son's case. Linda Crawford's face went from pale to ashen. Agents, I wasn't aware you were coming today. If you had called ahead, Ms. Crawford, Agent Foster said without taking his eyes off Marcus, we'll speak with you later. Right now, we need to talk to General Williams privately. Marcus felt a mixture of vindication and dread. His instincts had been right. Something was seriously wrong. But the presence of federal investigators meant the truth was going to be worse than he had imagined. General Williams, Agent Chen said, her voice gentle but professional, we've been investigating irregularities in medical care provided to wounded service members at Forward Operating Base Kandahar. Your son's case is part of that investigation. What kind of irregularities? Marcus asked, though part of him didn't want to hear the answer. Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private. Agent Foster suggested. Glancing around the busy waiting room, Crawford quickly interjected, you can use my office. It's completely confidential. No, Marcus said firmly. I've had enough of this hospital's version of confidentiality. Whatever you have to tell me, you can say it here. Agent Foster nodded, understanding. General, your son sustained an IED blast injury on October 15th. He was treated at the field hospital and then transferred to the main medical facility at FOB Kandahar. According to the official report, he died from complications related to his injuries on October 17th. That's what I was told, Marcus said. What's the problem? Agent Chen opened a file folder. The problem is that the medical care your son received was not standard protocol. He was treated by a surgeon who was not properly credentialed for the type of surgery he performed. Additionally, that surgeon was under the influence of alcohol during the procedure. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt his knees weaken, and for a moment, the busy hospital around him seemed to fade into background noise. Are you telling me my son died because of malpractice? We are still investigating, Agent Foster said carefully. But yes, there's substantial evidence that your son might have survived his injuries if he had received proper medical care. Marcus stared at the agents, his mind struggling to process this information. Michael hadn't died a hero's death in combat. He had died on an operating table because someone who was supposed to save him was drunk. Who was the surgeon? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. James Whitman. He's currently under investigation by the military justice system. But General, there's more you need to know. Agent Chen continued. Dr. Whitman treated 6 other wounded service members during his deployment. 4 of them died. The 2 who survived have suffered permanent disabilities that should have been preventable. And this hospital? Marcus gestured around him. What's their involvement? Memorial Veterans Hospital has been treating the survivors and has been in possession of the complete medical records from FOB Kandahar. They've been instructed by their legal department to limit access to those records while the investigation is ongoing. So they've been lying to me all day. They've been following legal advice that prioritizes protecting the hospital from liability rather than providing transparency to families, Agent Foster said. We don't agree with that approach. Marcus turned to look at Linda Crawford, who had been standing nearby during this entire conversation. Ms. Crawford, you knew all of this when I walked in here at 8:30 this morning, didn't you? Crawford looked like she wanted to disappear. General Williams, we were advised by our legal counsel you were advised to lie to a grieving father about how his son died. Marcus's voice was steady, but the anger underneath was unmistakable. You made me sit in that waiting room for 8 hours, knowing full well that my son died because of medical malpractice. General, please understand, we are bound by certain legal constraints. No, Marcus interrupted. You're bound by a desire to avoid responsibility. There's a difference. Agent Chen stepped forward. General Williams, we want to provide you with the complete medical records right now. Every page, every report, every piece of documentation from your son's treatment. You have a right to know exactly what happened. Marcus nodded, but his attention was still focused on Crawford. How many other families have you lied to? How many other parents have been kept in the dark about what really happened to their children? Crawford didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. All of them, Agent Foster said. Every family of the service members treated by Dr. Whitman has faced similar delays and stonewalling when trying to access complete records. The magnitude of the cover-up began to dawn on Marcus. This wasn't just about his son. This was about a systematic effort to hide the truth from multiple military families. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now, you get the truth, Agent Chen said. All of it. And Dr. Whitman faces court-martial for dereliction of duty, reckless endangerment, and involuntary manslaughter. And the hospital? Agent Foster glanced at Crawford. The hospital will face federal investigation for obstruction and failure to comply with federal regulations regarding veterans' medical records. Marcus looked around the waiting room one more time. 8 hours ago, he had walked in here as a grieving father looking for closure. Now he was leaving as a man who knew his son had been failed not just by one drunk surgeon, but by an entire system designed to protect itself rather than the people it was supposed to serve. But the story wasn't over yet. 3 weeks after that devastating day at Memorial Veterans Hospital, Marcus Williams found himself in a very different kind of waiting room. This time, he was at the Pentagon, preparing to testify before a congressional subcommittee investigating military medical care. The difference was stark. Here, he was treated with the respect and transparency that should have been extended to him from the beginning. The investigation that had started with his 8-hour wait had exploded into a national scandal. Agent Foster and Agent Chen had kept their promise. Within hours of their conversation at the hospital, Marcus had received every page of his son's medical file. What he found there was even worse than he had imagined. Dr. James Whitman hadn't just been drinking during Michael's surgery. He had been drinking regularly throughout his deployment. The medical staff at FOB Kandahar had known about his alcohol problem, but had failed to report it up the chain of command. Michael's death wasn't just the result of one moment of negligence. It was the predictable outcome of a system that had repeatedly failed to protect wounded service members. But Marcus had also discovered something else in those files, something that would change everything. The morning of his testimony, Marcus sat in the Pentagon corridor reviewing his prepared statement one final time. Beside him sat Patricia Hayes, who had become not just his advocate but the catalyst for a much larger investigation into military medical practices. General, Patricia said quietly, are you ready for this? Marcus nodded, though ready seemed like an inadequate word for what he was about to do. Today, he would not just tell his son's story. He would represent every military family that had been betrayed by the system they had trusted with their most precious gift. The hearing room was packed with reporters, congressional staff, and other military families who had suffered similar losses. As Marcus took his seat at the witness table, he could see Linda Crawford sitting in the back of the room. She had been subpoenaed to testify about the hospital's actions. Congressman Robert Martinez, chairman of the subcommittee, called the hearing to order. General Williams, thank you for being here today. We know this is difficult, but your testimony is crucial to our understanding of systemic failures in military medical care. Marcus leaned toward the microphone. Congressman Martinez, thank you for holding these hearings. But before I tell you about my son's death, I need to tell you about what I discovered in his medical files. The room fell silent as Marcus opened the folder in front of him. Staff Sergeant Michael Williams was wounded on October 15th. But according to the medical records, he was conscious and stable when he arrived at the field hospital. He spoke to the medics. He asked them to call his father, me, and tell me he was going to be okay. Marcus's voice remained steady, but the emotion underneath was evident to everyone in the room. My son survived the IED blast. He survived the helicopter evacuation. He survived the initial triage at the field hospital. What he didn't survive was the medical system that was supposed to save him. Marcus turned to a specific page in the file. Dr. Whitman operated on my son at 11:47 p.m. on October 16th. According to these records, Dr. Whitman's blood alcohol level, when he was tested the following morning, was still 0.08. That was 12 hours after the surgery. Gasps echoed through the hearing room. Even the congressional staff, who had seen the preliminary reports, seemed shocked by this detail. But here's what really happened, Marcus continued. My son didn't die during surgery. He died 18 hours later from complications that, according to 3 independent medical experts who reviewed his file, should never have occurred if the surgery had been performed competently. Congressman Martinez leaned forward. General Williams, what you're describing isn't just malpractice, it's criminal negligence. Yes, sir, it is. But that's not the worst part. Marcus turned to another section of the file. The worst part is that 2 other surgeons were available that night. Sober, qualified surgeons who could have operated on my son. But Dr. Whitman pulled rank and insisted on performing the surgery himself. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Patricia placed a supportive hand on Marcus's shoulder as he continued. My son called out for me as he was dying. According to the nurse's notes, his last words were, "Tell my dad I tried to come home." He died believing he had failed somehow, when the truth is that the system failed him. Marcus closed the file and looked directly at the camera that was broadcasting the hearing live. I want every service member and every military family watching this to understand something. Michael didn't die for his country. He died because individuals within the system prioritized their own interests over his life. That's not sacrifice, that's betrayal. The hearing room was completely silent now. Dr. Whitman has been court-martialed and sentenced to 20 years in military prison. But he's not the only one responsible. Every person who knew about his drinking and said nothing, every administrator who prioritized legal liability over transparency, every official who participated in covering up these deaths, they all bear responsibility. Marcus turned back to the congressional panel. My son was 24 years old. He believed in service, in honor, in doing the right thing even when it was difficult. He deserved better from the country he died serving. As Marcus finished his testimony, the room remained silent for several moments. Then, slowly, people began to stand. First the other military families, then the reporters, then the congressional staff, and finally the subcommittee members themselves. It wasn't applause. It was something deeper. It was recognition, respect, and a promise that Michael Williams's death would not be in vain. 6 months later, Congress passed the Military Medical Accountability Act, requiring mandatory reporting of medical errors and establishing an independent oversight board for military medical facilities. Memorial Veterans Hospital faced federal sanctions and was required to implement new protocols for communicating with military families. But for Marcus Williams, the most important outcome was simpler. No other father would have to wait 8 hours to learn the truth about how his son died. Michael Williams had finally come home, not just to his father, but to a country that had learned to honor his sacrifice by demanding better from itself.